Now if we take a look at folder number 4, basic optimization, and we look at EK125403, this is our native render bug example. What this PSD will do is illustrate the differences between Photoshop and how it renders elements and the actual browser or the device that you're using it with. So there are a few different examples that we have within this actual PSD file. So let's just go over them really quick. Now on the left side, all the actual elements are simply images. What this will do is maintain the exact visual of the element so we can compare it to our actual elements on the right hand side, which these will be respective. So for instance, this is text, and this text has line breaks in between, and we also have a full paragraph text here. And you'll note that with Photoshop, Photoshop uses hyphens, so this is very important, where most environments do not use hyphens. What they will do is actually break the text with words. A quick note, if you want to achieve this, what you're going to have to do is go to your paragraph settings and basically remove hyphenate, and this will actually render it similar to how a browser will. Not exact, but similar. So we're just going to keep it on just for the purpose of this example. Now the next example that we have here is we have positioning and size. This is actually using two individual text layers with two different sizes, and you can see how they're basically placed within the scope of the actual group. The next example that we have is a gradient. So you can see how this gradient will render in comparison to our actual Photoshop file. Now images are rendered completely differently than elements. Photoshop is great rendering. Browsers, they're getting there. Now the next example that we have is basically different angles for our gradients. Now this is a mistake on our part. We don't render the angles exactly as they show visually in Photoshop, but we're making steps to get there. So you can see basically the different degrees and how they're actually rendered in the output. The last example we have is a text layer that basically begins with 1, and you'll see that in the layer name. Now no environment supports a layer name with a numerical instance, so what will happen is this element will actually render directly at the top in our browser. So let's just go ahead and export this so we can take a look at how it actually renders visually. Once the export is complete, we can go to our HTML folder and take a look at our actual output. Now we can just test this in one browser. All browsers will basically have the same effect. So you'll see off the bat that we have our text string. This was relevant to our actual Photoshop design, where we noted that no environment will basically support a layer with a numerical index to begin with the layer name. So what this will do in the output is it will actually cause CSS errors. Now this is only an HTML bug. In other environments such as Flash, the layer name is treated differently. Now if we continue with the examples, you'll see that this is the actual image of our text, but this is the rendered text. Now this is because the browser renders fonts differently than pretty much everything else. All browsers will render fonts differently, so the size and the line breaks in the fonts will be different. Now the next one that we have is our actual paragraph block. Now you'll see that in the actual browser, what it'll do is break per word, so it won't actually continue the word and hyphenate it. And you'll note the difference between how Photoshop is compared to our output. And again, we said that we can turn this off in our Photoshop PSD. The next one that we're going to look at is the position and sizing of elements. Now if we were to look at this in different browsers, again this would be something that would come out differently per browser, as they do treat fonts independently. So you can see how this is actually placed and the size of the actual text elements themselves and the font typeface compared to the image. So you can see where the two individual text layers end compared to where the actual rendering ends. Now the other to note is our gradients. Now gradients, when they're rendered using web technologies, so this is mostly CSS, they're not treated the exact same way as Photoshop. Photoshop has image rendering, while browsers, what they will use is effects to actually render the graphics. So they will be treated differently. You'll have to play around with them a slight bit to kind of get the exact look and feel for your actual project. Now the next is our angles that we render with gradients. inconvenience. You'll see that our angles are slightly different. Most of them are actually reversed, but some of the corners you'll see that our calculations are a bit off. You can play with them to get your exact look and feel that you want to have, but what you can do is you can also just rasterize it as an image or create it, convert it as a smart object, and you'll get the exact look and feel. Now, the last one that we have is our layer names that start with a number. You'll see at the very top that it's rendered basically in the incorrect position, and this is because, again, no environment will usually support a layer name that starts with a numerical index. The last thing to note is our actual indexes for each individual example. So for instance, we start with 1 and go to 2 and 3, etc. You'll notice though that they are not positioned in line with each individual example. So for instance, number 6 should be down here, number 5 should be here. But in our actual PSD, if we take a quick look, we'll see that they are positioned correctly. The reason why this happens is because what we did was we used an individual text block in each segment. So you can actually see that we can move the carriage down for the actual text. And if we actually just try to resize that, you'll see where the shape itself encompasses. Now, with the output, the problem is paragraph text. As you can see from the example, line breaks are not equal in each output. So in the particular test case that we're doing right now, you'll see that, for instance, these have shorter line breaks. This is because we're using Chrome. And if you watch one of our previous examples, you'll see that line breaks are treated differently between each browser.